All right. Welcome this afternoon to a presentation by Gunster Law, one of our gold sponsors at the Tampa Bay chapter of FEI. Today's topic, very timely and a well-rounded discussion of the impacts of COVID on your business. Today we have two presenters. We have Lena Angelisi. She's a transactional attorney representing public and private companies in various corporate securities, M&A, and capital market transactions. Lena is experienced in the full range of securities disclosure, compliance, and corporate governance matters, with a focus on assisting clients in meeting their day-to-day public reporting and compliance challenges. Probably a lot of reporting requirements that'll be upcoming for those of us who are a part of a public company. And then she's joined by Ed Suarez. Ed has represented and advised small, medium, and large organizations regarding all aspects of their labor and employment relations. Ed's experience includes advising employers regarding employment law, human resource management and compliance, traditional labor law matters, and executive and organizational coaching. One administrative note is to qualify for your CPE, we will have some polling questions. All you need to do is click on your choice. And once the results are posted, if it does not go away immediately, just click the X on that box and you'll be able to continue to see the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lena and Ed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll get started, and if you would change the screen for me, please. Thank you. To the first slide. I found myself, for at least the last year, maybe a little bit longer, doing a lot of thinking about artificial intelligence. We all have Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant. There's the autonomous motor vehicles, and now I'm working on a discovery project where I'm assisting going through, there's over 500,000 documents. And the software we're using has AI in it. So it sends me a document to look at, I take a look at it, and I check that it's relevant or not relevant because I'm looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack. And it pays attention and it learns from me and it starts to get an idea of what's relevant and what's not. And then faster than anything I could ever possibly do, it suddenly finds all of the needles in a haystack, brings them to the top, gets rid of what I don't need, and it's kind of scary because it sometimes makes me wonder when I become obsolete. But I think that you're probably wondering, why am I telling you about artificial intelligence and what does that possibly have to do with what we're talking about today? And the reason I mention that is because we need to think about change, and not just when it happens to us. Like in mid-March, suddenly we were shut down and we changed faster than we could ever imagine possible. People are teaching their children at home. We're working from home and we're working efficiently, and everything we know just shut down and changed in March. And I think that one thing we learned is that some of these changes we can stay with. And we also learned that we need to be proactive. We need to actually think about changes. And so we were Zooming with everybody. Would you change the screen? And suddenly I felt like I was in a Jetsons cartoon, because suddenly my boss was in the living room with me or in my bedroom with me on the screen, and we're talking. And everybody had to figure out how to do this new things. For example, if you change the screen again, the courts had to figure out how are we going to have trials again. And this was actually the first decision. It was non-binding, but this was a jury trial in Texas, all done on Zoom. And so we're keeping in touch with Zoom with our family and friends. We're doing work on Zoom, and it hasn't come without its headaches and its learning curve. Would you change the screen? I think everybody probably knows about the flush that was heard around the world. One of the esteemed justices during a oral argument at the Supreme Court, in a Zoom oral argument at the Supreme Court, suddenly there was a flush. And nobody's quite sure which justice went to the bathroom, but we all know that one of them did. And so it was, that's part of the learning curve that we had to learn. You know, our dogs are going to bark, and you know, what else can we do? And definitely use the mute button when you need to. So change is what's really happening to us, what we have to work through. And the important thing is the companies that do the best, that have the highest profits, that have the most satisfied customers, the ones that have the best hires, are the companies that are managing actively, proactively managing change. And that's what we're doing now, and we need to learn to do it. We need to embrace it. Ed and I are going to talk to you today about, you know, some of the changes you should be thinking about and making. We hope that you not only enjoy thinking and talking about it now, but we hope will inspire you to think it, how to continue doing this when COVID's over, when things maybe get back to our new normal, that you'll start to embrace change. So I want to introduce you to my esteemed colleague, Ed Soares. It just naturally thinks this way. I have to work to think about change. Ed just does it naturally. He's one of those people that his brain just goes that way. I think you're going to enjoy everything he has to talk to you about, and I'm going to turn it over to Ed.
Well, thank you, Lena. I appreciate it. And good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure being here today. If we could change the slide, please. As we all know, we went from an incredible economy where we were zooming along. We had a great January and February. And then in March, at the beginning of March, we were starting to hear, actually I'm going to say in February, we started to hear about COVID as it was rolling across the Pacific into the United States. And then in March, we got the hit. And then all of a sudden we went from a robust economy, we went into turbulent times. And interesting, as we started dealing with the issue of COVID, the government came in and started to put into place certain laws as it dealt with employees. And so all of a sudden we came out with Family First, the Coronavirus Response Act. And I'm sure that all of you are very familiar with it. And today's presentation isn't to go into the details of it, but to discuss where this is going. So we know that the first part of the Family First Coronavirus Response Act dealt with the issue of eligibility of employers, and that it dealt with employers that fewer than 500 employees. It provided full-time employees 80 hours and part-time employees with an average number of hours that they worked over a 2-week period with regards to pay. We know that that part of the law was immediate. There was immediate eligibility for an employee. So the minute you were hired, you had that to your disposal. We know that the law had 6 different provisions. And based on the provisions, we knew that there was a formula for how you were to pay the employees. So when you look at the provisions, it had to do with whether you were being quarantined, whether you were sick, whether you had symptoms and seeing a doctor, whether somebody that you were caring for was sick with the virus. There was a provision there for schools closing or daycares being closed. And based upon that, we saw the difference in pay structure. So for example, on the pay schedule for yourself being sick, there was a cap of $511 per day or $5,110 in total. And then for those with school or you're taking care of somebody, it was 2/3 of the applicable wage amount, a $200 per day and a $2,000 total under that program. And then again, the employer has the ability to take a payroll tax credit equal to 100% of the under the act at the end of the year. So why is this important? Why are we talking about this as business is moving forward? And one of the reasons that this is critical is that this is a one-shot deal, meaning that there are a lot of individuals who took advantage of this program in March and in April. And there's a misconception that if they got paid for their 80 hours in March and in April or in May, that now moving forward, they're going to have that opportunity once again. So there are individuals, for example, that may have taken the time off and gotten paid under this provision, for example, for time off for school. And so they may have already gotten their total amount under this part of the act. And so as we move forward, as we're opening, as we're seeing these peaks and valleys occur, we need to understand what our responsibilities are with regards to this financial burden. If we can flip to the next slide, please. The other part of the act is the Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act. And that is also for employers less than 500, includes employers less than 50, unlike the FMLA. In this situation, the employee has to be employed for at least 30 days. And this provision is specific to one of the previous provisions under the sick pay, the emergency sick pay, and that is with the schools closing or the child care provider not being available. And under this provision, again, it's 2/3 of the employee's regular pay, but it's capped at $200 per day or $10,000 in total. So there were a lot of individuals who took advantage when the schools started closing in March, end of March and April through May up to Memorial Day, where they took advantage of that full time frame and exhausted both aspects of the law. The first 2 weeks under the Emergency Sick Pay Act, the remainder under the Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act. And now that we're going to be starting up schools and trying to get back to school, some online, some not online, this will now become another contentious area, because if your kids are 18 or older, of course, they're able to defend for themselves, but you're going to have a lot of employees who have smaller children. And so those kids, some of them, the parents are going to want the kids to go online school. They don't want their kids to go to school and be exposed. And the school districts are allowing these options. And so now the pressure is going to be on the employer. How are we going to deal with that? Are we going to allow the telework if that was an option? Or are we not going to allow the telework? And we'll be talking about the significance of that telework in a little bit. But there is some grand significance there. Because when this all started and we were thrown into this turbulent environment in March and in April, telework, we embraced it because we wanted work to get done. But one of the questions that we talk about and that we've been passing around in the business sector is how efficient and effective has telework been in comparison to working at an office or at the work site? And so we've been telling folks, hey, you're doing a great job. And the question then becomes, are you doing a great job with the understanding that we're doing telework? Or are you doing a great job when we compare your work output, telework versus on-site? And how sustainable is that if the telework is only a portion of what the output is when it's on-site? For example, if an employee, an individual in telework is providing 75% of what they were doing on site, in March and April, when this was all converting and we thought it may be a short-term issue, that might have been acceptable. But if this becomes a long-term issue, is 75% performance enough? Is 75% performance justifiable to the pay that we are providing to individuals for that telework? And these are the questions that are going to be coming up as this pandemic continues to linger on. And we're in a spike right now, or in a peak right now. And now we're going to have the high schools and the grade schools going back to school. We're going to have the colleges going back to school. We'll then see Labor Day occurring. Then we have an issue that when you start reading on the background of the medical journals, the concern that as the flu season begins to increase, we know that this virus is already mutated. The COVID has mutated multiple times. What's going to happen when the flu season hits and COVID? Are we going to see a mutation? And what is that going to look like as we go into the fall and into the winter? And we need to be thinking ahead as an organization of how we're going to deal with that as we move forward. If we can get to the next slide, please.
Ed, just a second. I need to launch a polling question quickly. I'm sorry to break your momentum.
So these are the issues that we're going to be dealing with, folks, as we move forward. And that may even change the way we do business, our model of how we do business. It wasn't mentioned before, but one of the things, I'm at the university quite a bit because I'm getting my doctorate degree, and I'll be graduating hopefully in December of this year from University of South Florida for the business school. And all of us in our group are talking about a lot of these issues as they're coming up. And so it's getting quite a stir at the university as we look at business models moving forward. Another issue that we want to talk about really quickly is this whole issue of waivers. Should we do the waivers? Should we not do the waivers for employees? Do we do it for our customers? A lot of employee waivers they're usually unenforceable. They're very difficult to enforce. With regards to customer waivers, you really can't prevent the government enforcement actions or claims, including gross negligence from a customer. The other issue too is when you're asking a customer to sign a waiver, you pretty much can anger or piss off the customer. And those are things that we need to consider as we're asking a customer to sign a waiver if we decide to do the waiver issue. An alternative is questionnaires or posting of notices, sharing with our customers and our employees what we are doing, the efforts that we're putting forward with regards to sanitation, social distancing, masks, and all the other efforts that we are putting forward to keep our customers, our guests, and our employees safe. So again, that's kind of like the waiver issue in a nutshell. The next slide, please. The CDC, I would be remiss if I don't talk about some of the guidelines that just came out in the last couple of days. Persons with COVID-19 who have symptoms and were directed to care for themselves at home may discontinue isolation of the following conditions. At least 10 days have passed since the symptoms onset, and at least 24 hours have passed since resolution of fever without the use of a fever-reducing medication, and other symptoms have improved. That's the new guidelines. The 72-hour issue is now gone. That they don't want that 72 hours to be in play. The EEOC is still allowing employers to test for COVID-19, and the EEOC continues to allow employers to require a release to return to work from a medical provider. But folks, realistically, getting these releases from medical providers is very difficult because they're extremely busy. They are just swamped right now. And so we're going to have to look at getting alternative forms. Sometimes it's a form that's already preset, or it's a stamp or an email. And so we're going to have to be flexible with these healthcare providers who have already been taxed to the limit and don't even have time to breathe. Next slide, please. So this is the slide that I really want to spend some time on, and it's very important. And this is other business considerations, and you'll see how this all ends up when we talk about the employees at the end. But one of the things that we talk about is, we're starting up and we're having to start and stop and start and stop. And one of the things we talk about is how assessing and making sure we assess our customers' financial sustainability. When you look at your customers and you look at the strength of your customers and who are your top customers pre-COVID, that doesn't mean that they're going to be your top customers during COVID or post-COVID. And one of the things that we advise folks is to assess the financial stability of your customers by not only looking at the pre-COVID history of how they pay their bills and how they order and so forth, but the industries that they're in. There are some industries that we know are taking a hit, a greater hit than other industries. Travel, hotels, hospitality industry, airlines, airports. Those are industries that are taking a tremendous hit right now. Being able to communicate, reaching out to your customers, asking them about what actions they took when COVID began to hit in March and April, what they've done during the COVID hit, what are their plans for as they start pulling out of COVID, or as we start going through this roller coaster. The reason I share that is in those communications, you're going to learn a lot about how that management team at your customer site thinks. How strategic are they? How prepared do you think they are to deal with what's coming in the future? So those are good indicators with regards to the strength of your clients and your customers moving forward. Another area that we have a lot of discussions are business models. I mean, think about this presentation today, the fact that we're doing this over the computer on Zoom. A lot of businesses are going to be looking at Zoom and products like Zoom for conferences in the future. That's going to have a huge impact on people traveling around the country for meetings. So the model of how we do business is going to change. So is the pre-COVID business model a sustainable model in the future? are we having discussions, or the discussions that are occurring surrounding how we're going to phase the modifications, the phasing of the modifications of the business models as they change? And what do those transitions look like? So we have a business model. We determine that we're going to have some modifications to the business model. What do the transitions look like? How do we transition from where we are today to what we believe we're going to look like in the future in a cycle of turbulence of on, off, on, off, on, off? That's going to be very important, because as we are deciding that business model, as we're trying to think about those modifications, as we look at our customers' financial stability and we assess that, and we look at the needs of our customers, as we modify the model to those needs, as we modify the model to what's happening in our society and what the rules and regulations that are being bestowed upon us in how we conduct our business, we now have a workforce that we have to deal with. We have a workforce that we have dismissed in April and March and in April, that now we're bringing back and releasing into a changed model. And one of the things that I ask people is, do we have a multi-purpose work team? And the way to answer that question is, have we developed an objective-based skills matrix and capacity matrix? And by skills matrix, you know, I tell people that when you are in turbulent times, you need individuals that can do more than one task. You need that utility player that may not be the best at 10 different tasks, but has the ability to do 10 tasks, as opposed to the one individual that can do one task really well, but is unable to do the other 9. Because sometimes you're going to have, because of business interruptions, or because of the need of the customers, or because of the demands that are being made, a team of individuals that can flow with the business or with the process as we're delivering a product or a service. And so, do we have a skills matrix that says these 10 individuals, we know that each one can do these different skill sets at these different levels? And how do we objectively measure those individuals in those skill sets so we can determine who we need as we move forward in the new modified model? The other part of this is the capacity matrix, which is something that a lot of people have never even heard of. But the capacity matrix in the workforce is the ability of an individual to learn a new task. I was sharing this with Lena yesterday. You can have an individual, and Lena, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to use your name, but you can have Lena and Ed working in the same facility. And Lena's been there for 15 years, and she knows 10 skill sets. And Ed's been there for 6 years, and he knows 8 skill sets. And when you look at how long it took Lena to learn the 10 skill sets, you look at the training matrix, and you see that, taking into consideration any time off that she had and so forth, it took her approximately 11 years to learn 10 tasks. But in the 6 years that Ed was there, we see that it took Ed 4 years to learn 8 tasks. By measuring that time sequence, we can come to a conclusion that Ed has the ability to learn quicker than Lena, which is not true, but in this example. So when you look at that, now in a turbulent environment where we're going to have a lot of change and we're going to need flexibility and we're going to have movement, if we can objectively make that determination based upon our matrix of our skills matrix in our training time frame, who would you prefer to have in a turbulent environment? The person who has 10 versus 8 tasks, or the person who has the ability to learn tasks and new methods quicker? And that's part of that multi-purpose work team, that ability to learn and to be able to evolve as the organization is evolving in a time that is in chaos and change. And so I share these thoughts as something to think about as we're moving into this unknown time frame, as we move into this unknown period. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lena.
Ed and Lena, I need to launch a polling question really quickly. Leave that up for about 30 seconds and move on. And if the pop-up doesn't disappear on its own, just click it closed. Okay, proceed. Thank you.
Okay, if you would go ahead and change the slide again. The Payroll Protection Program, Paycheck Protection Program. Everybody's heard of this. I think our children know the names of this. I don't know that there's anybody in the United States that isn't sick of hearing about the Payroll Protection Program. But I think it's worth mentioning again because they did recently enact the third version of it, which is the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. And it fixed some things. People were having issues. Because there was a 75-25 requirement that at least 75% of whatever was forgivable had to be spent on payroll, and the balance, the 25% could be spent on the other permissible expenses. And there were people that didn't have, they needed a better split than that. The 75-25 was not working for them. And they also were not able to use all of the funds because of that requirement. For example, and I'll give you a very easy example, if you had a $125,000 loan, your payroll for the 8 weeks was going to be equal to $75,000, then that set your 75%. You knew that you could only use another 25,000 of the loan, and you would have 25,000 of the loan that was not going to be forgivable because you couldn't touch that other 25,000 without violating the 75-25 ratio. So one of the things is they repaired that. They did a number of things. I think if anybody's worked with the Payroll Protection Program, you know that understanding how all the forgiveness mechanics was pretty much a nightmare, and there were left so many unanswered questions, and the SBA was very, very slow at rolling out answers. People were already starting to file, finishing the first 8 weeks, and they didn't have the answers they needed to know whether they were going to be forgiven or not. The calculations were crazy, and there were lots of questions that were going unanswered. So they did attempt to take care of some of these things for everybody, and that was good. And I just thought I'd run through them because you may be doing some of the new things. The first thing they did was they extended the minimum maturity date from 2 years to 5 years. And that was the CARES Act, when it originally came out, it didn't even say what the number of years would be. And by virtue of the SBA's various interim interpretations, we knew it would be 2 years. And when they came back out with the Payroll Flexibility Act, they gave us a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 10 years for maturity. And that will be very helpful to people because, as we all know, we're still working our way through this. People are not functioning at 100% in almost any industry out there. So the additional time for people to get on their feet and have this time to pay this loan off to the extent that they don't have parts of it forgiven, that will be very helpful. Another thing they did was people weren't able to use the funds within the 8 weeks, and they went to a 24-week. You're automatically a 24-week if you receive the loan after that went into effect. And it's 24 weeks from the date that you received the loan through no later than December 31st, 2020, and you can pick your 24 weeks. If you had your loan before that, you can either choose to go to a 24-week program or you can stay with the 8 weeks. And it does raise some questions of what will be forgiven if you stick with the 8 weeks. For example, we'll talk about the next one, then I'll show you how the two are interrelated. As you all know, there was a penalty if you had fewer employees. They set up a couple of arbitrary dates, and for measuring your full-time equivalent employees. The dates were kind of arbitrary, and the mathematics were kind of very odd, but you would do this funky little calculation, and if based on that calculation you had fewer full-time equivalent employees from the first date to the last date, then you were dollar for dollar going to be penalized. And even though your loan would otherwise be forgivable, there was could be potentially a significant chunk of your loan that was now no longer forgivable. So what they've done now is they've realized that some people did not want to come back to work. They couldn't come back to work. They had children that they need to stay home with. They had some people were receiving unemployment, and when they were invited back, they didn't want to give that up because that was more than what they were earning in their job. But for a number of reasons, people moved, people's lives changed, and you weren't able to rehire your employees because this was a program that wasn't a company bailout. This was a program that was an employee bailout. It was to benefit the employees. Very little of the money went to companies. It went to your employees to keep your employees hired. And if you had your business completely shut down, you actually became an arm of the unemployment office. And you, instead of those people all going to unemployment, you took care of your group there. But it was for the employees. And you were supposed to rehire your employees if you had let them go. And many people were, through no fault of their own, unable to rehire their employees. And so, but they would still be penalized under the original CARES Act statutory language. So this, the Flexibility Act also cured that for a lot of people. If you're unable to rehire your former employee, although you've made the good faith effort and you document that you've invited them back, and you also you have to have tried to rehire your old employee, and you have to have tried to hire someone similarly qualified to fill the unfilled positions. So it's an and, it's not an or. You have to have done both. Try to rehire the old person, try to hire a similarly qualified person. And if you document that you were unable to do that by December 31st of this year, then you will not be penalized, even if when the mathematical calculation comes in, your full-time equivalent employees are you fewer than the starting date, the date that they use for the measurement. There's one other also good faith exemption for that, from that penalty, and that is if people were unable to return to the same level of business activity because you were unable to resume your business activity because of either requirements or guidance for health, you know, whether it came from the CDC or your local government. If you were a movie theater and you're shut down, or if you're a restaurant and you are serving at, you know, half capacity or a quarter capacity, those would all give you a legitimate reason to end up with a calculation that would have given you a penalty, and that's now gone. And the way that relates to the deadline to hire is one of the ways you could correct that problem. If you found that you ended up with one fewer or two fewer or whatever the number might be employees and you were going to get a penalty, they gave you until June 30th to rehire people and get rid of that, and then you'd be forgiven and there would be no penalty. But given that it's a slow opening and a start and a stop and all, that deadline was not very helpful. So they've now extended that deadline, and the new deadline is December 31st. And the only problem or question, and where we caution people, is if you choose to stay with the 8-week covered period and you do not choose to go with the 24-week covered period, there's no guidance that tells us whether you can still fill that position in December, or if because you stuck with the 8-week period that you only have till June, and now you may potentially have a penalty. And we can't give you any assurance, I wish I could, that you have till December 31st, but I can't tell you. So I think the safest thing to do is that if you stay with your 8-week period and you need to rehire, please do your very best to rehire somebody by that June date, which is really right around the corner now, because we're just not sure that you're going to be entitled to rehire all the way until December 31st. Again, I told you they changed the ratio. Now you can spend more on other legitimate expenses. If you have a high rent or something and you need that money for that rent, that would be helpful. They've made it clear people were increased pay for people as bonuses for coming in and working when no one else would come in, that they were giving people hazard pay because of the they were in positions where they could not social distance or were potentially running into issues, potential health issues. And so they were receiving bonus and hazard pay, and no one was sure whether that was going to be permissible or not. And they did clear that up as well. They also cleared up the loan deferral period. There had been some questions about that, but now we know there's an absolute, you have 10 months from the time that you submit your request for loan forgiveness. There was also a question about payroll taxes. The CARES Act said that you could defer your payroll taxes into 2 payments, one to be made at December 31st of 2021 and one to be made on December 31st of 2022. However, another part of the act said that if you were applying for loan forgiveness, you could not take advantage of the payroll tax deferral program, and they've since cleared that up and said no, absolutely, retroactively as well, that you are entitled to use that payroll tax deferral. The program was supposed to end on June 30th. I don't know how much money is still in the fund. As of June 30th, there was still $130 million, and they extended the program to allow people to continue to apply for loans, particularly people who didn't. The first people to get in were obviously always the professionals, the people that have a better understanding what was happening. And then the smaller business person really came in the second round of funding. And those people are now, you know, who really need it are getting the assistance that they need. I don't know if they'll extend it or not. We really don't know what's going to happen. I know that this week they're negotiating potentially other relief programs, but I don't know what those are. I don't have the inside scoop on that. I only know what, same thing you hear on the news, and we're not sure what, you know, what's right from day to day. You can change them to the next one.
I need to take a quick pause for a polling question, Lena, before we move forward. Just 1 second.
And I think I need to hurry because I think we're getting near the end of the program, but I saw from the little survey that a lot of people have not applied for the Main Street lending program. So I'll just go over it quickly. It may be something suitable for you. There are a couple of financial requirements. You have to have been a healthy company prior to COVID. You cannot have been in financial distress prior to that. You have to be a United States company with 15,000 employees or less, or if you have more employees than that, your revenues in 2019 had to be 5 billion or less. So it's getting a higher, a larger company than what was available under the Paycheck Protection Program. The deadlines for applying, or the last time that they're going to, what happens is you go to your lender will help assist you with getting a loan. You will have to apply both. It's a combination because you're going to be assessed by the underwriter of your bank, the lender, as well as complete various application papers with your lender for the payroll protection program. Your lender will determine whether you're eligible for the loan, and then they will eventually the Federal Reserve will purchase 95% interest in the loan, so the lender will only retain 5% of the interest, and it's just a very good means to get additional credit into the system. I don't know if you know people in the banking industry, but what I'm being told is credit's going to be tight, and it's going to be tight for a while. And an opportunity to have one of these loans may be a wise thing if you think you would qualify, and down the road you might need it, and when it's a little less available. The Federal Reserve is only going to purchase these loans from the bank. The banks make them, and then the Federal Reserve will go to the bank and purchase them, but only through September 30th, unless it gets extended. So there's not a lot of time left to get one of these loans. And if you can flip quickly to the next one, I'll just show you quickly. There are 3 different types of loans. One's called the new loan facility, and it's a new loan. The second one's called a priority loan facility, which is also a new loan. And then the expanded loan facility is where you get an expansion of a loan you already have. They're 5-year loans, principal's deferred for 2 years, and you pay it back in year 3, year 4, and year 5, 15%, and then a balloon of 70%. Interest is deferred for a year. It's adjustable, LIBOR plus 3%. The new loan is smaller. As you can see, the numbers there, 250 to 35, 250 to 50, and 10 million to up to 300 million. And they determine the amount you know, is that they look at your debt to your EBITDA and they come up with a 4 times, 6 times, or 6 times ratio. But what the banks are telling me is they're going to stick, even though the Federal Reserve would allow you to have those higher debt ratios, a lot of the banks are going to stick with their general underwriting, and which is going to be 3 or 4%. So I don't know that you'll be able to qualify for some of those loans that the Federal Reserve would give you. And maybe we'll just quickly flip to the last screen. Oh, actually, there were 2 more, but are we out of time? And do I need to let people go?
You can go on, Lena, if you would like to. If people have to drop off, they will.
Okay, well, I'll go quickly. One of the things that's particularly helpful to small companies that are trying to raise a small amount of money and they need the financing, but this isn't necessarily a good time to be trying to raise capital. They gave a temporary relief from some of the crowdfunding rules. And if you're in that middle category and you want to raise between $107,000 and $535,000, they've given you some relief from the financial statements. Typically, you'd have to have financial statements not audited but reviewed. And they would, but now they're saying that they're going to, the financial statement requirement is just that they're certified now by your principal executive officer, which is a time saver, a cost saver to the issuer. And the other nice things about it is, so you can get, and they're also allowing you to start by just submitting your offering circular. So it almost gives you an opportunity to go out and test the waters and see what kind of interest there is in your company before your financial statements are finished. And then as soon as you can get your financial statements finished and produced, so then you can actually start offering with just your offering statement. Then get your financial statements in there and you can start accepting subscriptions. Typically, you would have to have, when the temporary rules are not in effect, you have to have your offering statement out there with your financial statements for 21 days. Which would give you, a significant period of time, 3 weeks before you could even start taking in money. Now, if your financial statements are ready and you get your offering circular out there, you just have to give the subscriber 48 hours which is their window to change their mind and withdraw their commitment to buy the shares. But you can quickly start closing on subscriptions and bringing in money. So it's cheaper, it's faster. They started on May 4th, and if you're going to do an offering, you have about another month, but it may very well be a very fast and less expensive way to raise capital than you otherwise would have been able to. And I think there's one more slide.
Lena, I'm going to launch a polling question quickly. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So can I begin again? There we go.
Okay, thank you.
And then just lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that obviously during this COVID crisis, it's become quite obvious the disproportionate number of deaths to the African-American community and our other communities of color. And the virus has exposed, obviously, a weakness in the system that I don't have answers for, obviously, and I know you don't expect me to. But I thought that it would be, that what I wanted to mention is that while we're all out there trying to adjust to this new normal and make these changes, there are people who may have challenges that we don't have to worry about or think about. entrepreneurship is difficult. There are, even before COVID, I mean, the historical rates of people of color trying to raise capital has always been at a lower rate, a smaller rate, a less successful rate than communities that have that are more privileged. And the success in raising capital has been a problem. They thought that the Jobs Act, part of the reason that the Jobs Act was enacted was that they thought the Jobs Act would help with communities that are not, don't have the same resources necessarily to raise capital. I thought it was very interesting, the Kauffman Foundation saying that Asian entrepreneurs typically rely on family. 72% of them obtain their startup capital from family. White entrepreneurs, most of them rely on business loans from banks, and Black entrepreneurs mostly rely on personal credit cards. And I wanted to give that statement made by the SEC Commissioner Allison Heron-Lee, because I thought it was very thoughtful. And she said the capital formation solutions in this space should be premised on an understanding that barriers exist and should be tailored to address those barriers. Too often we take the rising tides lift all boats approach when we facilitate capital raises, and we fail to consider the unique challenges that face particular communities, and that taking steps to enhance capital formation broadly does nothing to address underlying reasons why certain equal opportunities and access to capital still eludes some of our talented, hardworking minorities. It's crucial that we listen to those voices in this community, we amplify those voices, and we take the time to educate ourselves and inform our regulatory approach about how to structure the issues, how to make structural changes that will assist these communities. So I thought that was very thoughtful, and she said that long before any of the current Black Lives Matter or issues were happening. I think that was something she said in the speech last year. I thought it was very, very thoughtful on her part. And again, as we learned from the Jobs Act, it really did not improve the situation for our communities that do not have the same ability to raise capital. And that's all. Ed, did you want to say closing or anything?
No, we appreciate the opportunity. If you have any questions, please, we're here to answer. And if you have any questions outside of the presentation today, please feel free to email us, and we'll do our best to answer any questions you may have. That's what we're here for.
Thank you very much, Ed and Lena. And I will be sending out the presentation to all the participants today, along with Ed and Lena's contact information. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.